just make sure we're all set. Yes, we are. So this is the seventh episode of the Rappad Podcast. We have Nick Grace. Well, I'm gonna let you tell him what you do because you know better than I do. You do a lot, I'm sure.
Nick Grace. I wear a lot of hats, but primarily recording artist, music producer, and audio engineer.
Right. Okay. Um, yeah. So I brought you on because you've been on the forum since what, 2015, 2014?
Whatever the thing on my account says, it's a year before that. I used to be the most terrible forum person ever, and I got an entire account destroyed once. Like
Okay.
Amir straight up took it out of existence.
Okay.
So whatever a year before my current account says, that's when the old one who got smited got created.
Okay. Word. So you've been with Ratpad for a long time, basically. Um,
Yeah, it was really formative for me. I got on when I was an early teenager.
yeah, yeah. I relate because I think I was 18, maybe 17. No, I was 18 when I first came on, but I had been rapping for a year before that. But it was one of the first experiences where I was finding people who were actually talented rather than just like a bunch of random ass people. I don't know. Um,
Yeah, the golden era of that site was just every day was just new songs being posted. It's shit. It
yeah, it
almost
was
made you want to create because I got to keep up.
it was surprising. You would go on there not really expecting much, and then you'd find like Dom and Had and other people who are like semi-active or active on the forum, which you wouldn't really expect. So since then,
Yeah.
you've come a really long way. Can you talk a little bit about that?
I mean, well, anyone who's been around the forum long enough to know my name probably knows I used to make some of the cringiest music known to man. But my my persistence recording was kind of a double-edged sword. It got me roasted to shit, but it also got me a lot of really good feedback on my work, and I was a little OCD about fixing all the issues, the obvious glaring issues that my music had. And it got to the point where I started studying the science of what makes a song sound good because mine
Mm,
didn't, and I wanted them to.
okay. Um,
That's kind of where the journey started.
okay. And how have you kind of like kept yourself hungry to, not even just hungry, but kept yourself able to continue learning and applying without slowing down or stopping and continue to like turn it into something usable for your business, something profitable?
Well, I think in terms of the business, I kind of took that competitive mentality that came from going to the board every day and seeing oh, there's all these new songs and they sound better than mine, and I need to level up again, and taking that same mentality and just applying it to the landscape of my city. So my city
Mm,
has a pretty active DIY hip hop scene. And so there's a bunch of other studios around. There's producers who are well known for different styles. There's actually a pretty varied community around here. So I look around at my peers and I'm like, okay, what are these guys doing that I need to outdo? And that's kind of where I set my milestones. Oh, my guy Richie is really amazing on the keys, right? And I want better, piano melodies in my beats. So that's a goal for this month is practice my MIDI. Or
right.
this guy over here can rap stupid fast, but for some reason he doesn't have any breaths on his tracks. Figure out how he's punching that shit in because that shit sounds dope. And I'll set milestones based on what I see around me that's inspiring. Kind of like you said, you can't come on the forum and it's just it almost makes you want to get in the fray.
Exactly. Yeah. And one thing that I brought up before on the podcast, but something that I feel like in this context we don't talk about it a lot. What do you think about choosing your influences wisely?
Um, I think when you're just starting to learn, the idea of choosing your influences wisely might not be the greatest thing ever. Simply because you probably want to expose yourself to a variety of styles before you decide, okay, this is who I am as an artist. This is the package I'm going to market to people, and I'm going to sound like this. You should probably play with a few sounds before that. But when you go for your hard launch, if we're treating this as a business and this is opening day, by that point you should have a pretty decent idea of what your product is, and that means whatever you're selling, somebody else is buying. So okay, I want my music to hit with the same kind of people who listen to say, Juice World and Polo G. You know, like that's a market right there. You know, when you're treating it as a product, yes, you probably want to have like a decently small list of influences so you can target where you're shipping this thing. But when you're treating it as an art form, as a form of practice, as a learning experience, I'd say fuck your influences, man. Make what feels good, because honestly, you might find the next best thing.
Well, I find it interesting because personally, for me, what feels good is also what sounds good. I just like, I have an obsession with um, my ability to sort of grab the emotion that I'm going for and communicate it with somebody is also dependent on my knowledge as sort of like as a vocalist, my vocal tone and what words I'm reaching for and how I inflect them, and then the beat choice, and if I'm making the beat, how I'm going to flip with the drums, and so on and so forth. And there's just uh,
Mhm.
the same sort of mentality of having like the absolute best thing that you can for business I sort of have as an artist as well. So I've just always been like that. But then again, there's something to be said about, I think, anything in life that you approach, whether it's as a hobby or as something you really enjoy, or a business thing, you want to have a solid background of, like, you know, years and years of exploring with that thing so that you have knowledge of it and you can make a wiser decision based on all that experience. Whereas if you just kind of tumble into something and you're like, oh, this kind of suits me, I'm going to do whatever, you'll, in the long term, I can guarantee that it doesn't manifest longevity unless you're like a genius and you can move like this. A lot of people can't, and eventually you hit a wall where whatever you're following just kind of doesn't matter anymore, and that obsession isn't valuable anymore. But when you have an obsession with the actual roots of what you're doing and you have a knowledge of it, then you're much more likely to succeed because you already have that versatility baked into you and you know where things come from as well.
Yeah, and I definitely agree. I like to think about it in up. It's kind of a meme at this point among my circle, but like everyone started calling me the sensei because I have this thing about it where like I feel like taking from influences and drawing from different styles and things of that sort are, for a lot of people, um, a part of the process that they take towards finding their own intuition with music. You know, like the way you would study cars and take them apart and put them back together to see what makes them tick if you were ever going to design one. Let's say same way you would study anything if you're ever going to build one from the ground up. Like, I don't think it's necessarily wrong to have certain things you learn be derivative of other styles, but then apply them in your own way. That's what makes an artist. Art's all recycled if you really think about it. The
Yes.
techniques, the mediums, it's
Yes.
all been used before. It's been done before. The question is, can you figure out how to do it right so then you can do it in a way that's yours?
Exactly. The broader your scope of knowledge, the more original you're going to sound because you're taking more elements and turning them into something that is less likely to have already occurred. Whereas if you come into something with, you know, only a couple years of experience and you only know 10 artists, your sound is going to be very familiar to a lot of the people who hear it.
Yeah. And I think that's one of like the advantages that people who actually get into the production end of their music even a little bit tend to have is they get
Mm.
exposed to different styles without actively seeking them out. So they're not limiting their scope as much as somebody who's studying like one particular style of songwriting and that's all they're doing. Because if you're involved in like the backside of music production at all, you're basically going to be forced to get in tune with other styles, whether or not you make those styles.
Right. Yeah, I completely agree. In the time that I've been producing, it's strange because, like, as a hip hop producer, you really want to understand multiple, um, how you say, corners of what's possible now. Because there's one side where you build everything from scratch, and there's another side where sampling is what makes things go around. And a lot of people think that sampling is sort of like the easy way, but it's actually not. If you check out, you ever seen Mr. Carmack's Rhythm Roulette?
Yeah.
That's a great example of how people will go absolutely nuts with just a few little bits and bytes from one record instead of taking a loop, and they turn it into something totally unique, a sound that you couldn't get anywhere else. And that's what made hip hop what it was originally. Like, people
Yeah.
take it, yeah. So when you're able to understand both, because I feel like the aspect of making everything from scratch, making it into something digestible and clear for everybody to hear, that's something that came along later when they brought it into the studio and they wanted to sell it and make it something popular. But when it was just on the streets, it was a totally different kind of vibe. And so getting in tune with that really helps you as a rapper, I feel, to understand what the original flow of it was. Like, I feel like boom bap is always going to be relevant because that drum beat that we've always had is still prevalent today. Like, that's always going to be kind of baked into every style, whether it's at a different tempo. Like, it's going to be the snare on the 2 and the 4, and then the kicks kind of scattered around in different ways to make different grooves. We're always going to be using that.
Oh, my stupid phone keeps going off. So sorry.
Oh, did you hear me?
Yeah, no, I heard you.
Okay.
My bad.
You good?
No, and I'm actually glad you brought that up, and I definitely agree. One thing I'd like to see more of, though, is, I'm sure you're familiar with them, what Griselda does, right? So Griselda's production isn't necessarily traditional boom bap. It's definitely an evolution of the formula, but you can tell it draws like on that like old school sampled hip hop route. But the dope thing about Griselda to me is they don't have like sample clearances floating around out there. Like I can't find any paperwork on this. You know how you can usually tell like who somebody sampled and who they had to clear it from and that kind of shit? I can't find it. So unless you know of any, what that means is these niggas are making these sounds, then they're sampling themselves, which is a whole nother level of just what the fuck. Like they're literally creating the shit from scratch and then chopping and flipping it just to give it that sound. And I think that's kind of dope. It's kind of like the same thing as like we make all of our music digitally these days, right? But so many of our plugins emulate old school analog hardware because there's just something about that sound that people still want. And I feel like that's like the evolution of it. Like for commercial music to really have that soul of hip hop, you basically have to flip your own samples, which is that's the next level shit right there to me. Like the beats Benny the Butcher gets are fucking bonkers. I want like 8 of them.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that it's always going to be changing, and there's always going to be a way to bring what we've had further. And that's a perfect example because there's nothing stopping. You see this all the time. In fact, I feel like Carmack does this a lot. He has people send him live performances of what they're doing, and then he'll sample that and he'll turn it into a record. And we've been doing that for like 15 years now for the at least the artists who are really invested in doing that kind of thing and having that sense of originality. But it's also in the spirit of then you can take that anywhere because you have it set up in a way that people can play it live, and then you can take it on tour with you and you can make adjustments to it and add segments, and it goes deep. But I think it
I don't think that's the only way you can take shit live though, because the other thing is like if you do compose everything digitally, Logic Pro X is excellent at converting MIDI into traditional score. So you could literally burn sheet music out of your MIDI if you have Logic, or if you know a recording studio with Logic.
True, but
and then
more
you can
what
add
I'm
it to any musician who plays anything.
Right, but more what I'm referring to is when you write something and perform the recording of something in the spirit of live instruments already, it kind of gives you the foundation of that people can play this well in a live setting that like it sounds good, whereas sometimes we write things that are just kind of impossible to play, if you know what I mean. So there's a line you have to toe with that, and I think it just kind of helps it if you are already approaching it from the mindset of like I want live instruments and kind of live sound turned into a sample. You already know that this can translate well to a band, if that makes sense.
That makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
And actually, when it comes to vocals as well, that's something I encourage a lot of like self-recording artists to do, like artists that aren't my clients, but they ask me for advice. One of the biggest things I tell them that I figured out is if you're recording your voice on a piece of software, right, make sure that whatever chain you use in that software can also translate to some piece of equipment that you bring with you live. So, for example, if you have a MacBook, there's this excellent app called MainStage, right? And you can bring your entire chain with you live. Because what you're doing effectively when you record in the studio and you record through hardware and plugins and all that stuff is you're recording through an instrument that your voice is modulating, right? who shows up to a live performance without their instrument? It doesn't make sense. Rappers are the only people I've ever seen who pull up to a venue without the instrument that they played in the studio, because in this case the instrument is the studio. So like make sure you have like a decent stage mic if you're a rapper and you take yourself seriously. If you use a lot of effects in your music, make sure you have a laptop you can take on the road with you that can run your effects. Like bring your instruments with you when you perform, because in the same sense that like acoustic live performances lend themselves very well to, you know, acoustic recordings in the studio, if you're gonna go heavy digital, take that same work ethic that somebody who plays a real instrument would take and bring your shit with you. Like I feel like that's what a lot of people are missing when we talk about like, oh, we're recording music, we can't perform. No, we're recording music with instruments in the studio, and then we're not treating them like instruments when we get to the stage. Like look at what Travis Scott does. Great example. He brings his instrument with him when he performs, and you can hear it in his like live tracks.
Yeah. Yeah, it's
Or
true.
like when Kanye performs his like auto-tune shit and the light show is behind him and everything. Like he brings the instrument he was trying to play on the record with him. It's just easier to do and more accessible for a lot of like you said, from the streets, like grassroots musicians, if that instrument's a guitar and not like, you know, a fucking big ass Volksbox.
Right. Right. And I think another aspect to that is embracing the whole broad spectrum of what you have to learn if you're going to be kind of fending for yourself and watching your own back. Even if you're just a rapper, you need to know about what kind of laptop you need and what kind of software you need. And like, especially if you want to go do a live show and you want to do it on your own, you can't afford to pay somebody to do it for you every time, because if you do it on your own, over time you're going to be saving, thousands of dollars.
Yeah. Or if you happen to be in good with friends who actually also want to be creatives, another great way to go about that, split sheets. You're familiar with the concept of split sheets, right?
Maybe, I don't know.
All right, so check this out. I know you dropped music on various platforms before, but if you've never delved deep into the settings on like your DistroKid, your TuneCore, your Amuse, whatever you're using, I encourage you guys to go look at that shit. Because a big bargaining chip in the industry is always your percentage of the writer's share of the song, your percentage of publishing, your percentage of streaming, your percentages, right? As indie musicians, you have the ability to do that as well. So let's say you are just a rapper, right? Because like you said earlier, not everyone has like the mental acuity or the level of ADD that some people do to be able to do 8 things at once, you know? So maybe you're just a rapper, right? And then your buddy is just a beatsmith, and you guys move as a pair. Write his 50% split into the song and just work together. If you guys are building a business, you both get paid when that record gets paid. You know what I'm saying?
I think,
so,
yeah.
Like, if you are a team player, like make use of your splits, make use of your percentages. If like on some Nipsey Hussle shit, you own the masters, you can give out pieces of it. Kanye gave a pizza guy 10% on a song. Swear to God, true story.
That's dope. Yeah, I think I've noticed that before, and it goes to show that especially in the modern age, being independent and thinking for yourself has actually been easier than it ever has been. One of the metaphors that I use for this kind of a lot is, I don't know, if you rewind like 1,000 years or 2,000 years, having knowledge, having the ability to have skills and practice them was probably one of the biggest commodities back then, because you're likely born on a farm or something in the middle of nowhere, and you don't have anything, you don't have any communication with people, or you live in a city and people are sick and people are dying. So in the modern age, a lot of people, they're busy complaining and they think it's way too hard, and they don't want to go on Google, they don't want to have the ability to look for legitimate information and know the difference. But it's really easier than it ever has been, because all you have to do is just try it and just sort of know when people are bullshitting and know when they're being sincere, and you'll be able to learn anything from anywhere. Like, I don't know, that's just kind of how I see it.
And I like that, and I think that's why things like this podcast are necessary, honestly, because I think what it is like we as a society have collectively all kind of just got together and said, yeah, fuck this shit. And so when you're born, when you're growing up, like even if they're trying to be nice about it, like most of the adults around you have the mentality of fuck this shit, and everything sucks, and we drill it into our heads. Everything sucks. Everything is difficult. You're gonna grow up broke. This, that, and the other thing. Never once do you have somebody, in most people's cases, trying to spit game to you, trying to tell you, hey, you can do this. Hey, here's how to do this. Like, usually we have to go out and get that shit ourselves. And with everyone around us telling us it's too hard, just give up, a lot of people do. So I think shows like this are important because you're bringing on people who decided, hey, we're not giving up, and we're going to tell you how we didn't.
Yeah, yeah, that's
You know?
really it's it's an interesting dynamic, and I've been saying this for a long time. Um, but I think my upbringing and kind of where I came from affected my ability to say I know for certain that it works this way. But I heard people all my life say things like, the world isn't fair and bad people win and there's nothing you can do about it and there's no point in trying. And kind of always in the back of my head, I'm like, but there's a reason for everything. And if you can actually figure out what the reason is, then you can make a difference, at least in your own life, of
Thank
what's
you.
going on. And if you continue to ask questions, like I grew up around adults who don't like questions, and if you ask too much, they tell you to shut the fuck up, please and thank you. So you have
Your
to,
favorite word growing up was why on what?
yeah, because the fact is that people didn't explain themselves and what they were doing, and that made it so, because I'm so observant. Anywhere I would go, I would have a question of like, well, why is this the case? Like, why are you saying this thing? Why are you doing this thing? And people, I feel like I just grew up around people who didn't know, like they didn't necessarily know how to explain themselves. Um, so it just kind of drove me nuts. Um, and
That was my experience with school, actually. Like, I was
yeah, it
the
was
kid
like
who
that in
always got
school
kicked out of
too.
class for asking way too many absurd questions. And then on my way out of getting kicked out of class, I'm just like, but why? Why are you
Yeah,
kicking me out? And that would just infuriate people. I'm like, I don't understand. Explain it to me. Why am I getting kicked out again?
that's funny. Yeah, I was always like that around friends when I was like 12, 13, 14, and I started hanging out with like uh, crazier people in my neighborhood. And eventually I learned the difference of when to keep silent and when to actually ask questions, and sort of, if you're around for the purpose of being observant and asking questions, it's better to choose your friends wisely rather than just being anywhere, because a lot of people are going to choose not to appreciate that kind of thing. And as
Mm-hmm.
somebody who wants to stand out and kind of get information from places you wouldn't expect, you have to do things that normally people wouldn't do, even if that includes like not hanging out with the people that it would seem obvious you should be friends with, or people you get along with but you can't like share your music with them, or so on and so forth. Which,
See, I judge people by three criteria, and really only three criteria. And this is going to sound kind of cold, but it's the truth. Um, are they willing to learn? Are they useful for something? Could really be anything. And are they honest?
mm,
Because if you have somebody who's willing to shoot straight with you, they have some kind of skill or value they provide to your circle, and they're willing to learn new things, and you have that same mentality going in, then it's really difficult to have a negative relationship with that person, even if they're not like your best friend. Like me and my mechanic have that kind of relationship. I'm a computer geek, he's a mechanic. So we're constantly paying each other to fix these other shit, but we're also constantly showing each other what we're doing. So let's reach the point now where I barely have to call this nigga. And sometimes I'll call him and he'll just give me advice because
mm,
we both got something out of that relationship. We're friends now.
gotcha. Yeah,
Not because like I wanted to go get drinks with this guy on a Saturday, but because, we were just like I said, move the game around. Like people always try to say the game is to be sold, not told, or whatever. I don't believe that bullshit worth a damn. I don't like rules, and I feel like why are we not sharing information? We live in the internet age. Like
I
Christ
completely
shakes.
agree. uh I talked about this with was it Papa? You know who I'm talking
Yeah,
about? He brought
yeah.
this up, that exact saying, the game is to be sold, not told, because we were talking about how there are people in the underground who, like, sometimes you'll have fans who kind of sadistically will say like, "Oh, I don't want you to blow up because you're gonna change. Like, I would rather this be underground and just keep it to myself." And I was just kind of like, man, if you want to go anywhere with your artistry, definitely throw that shit out of the window, because there are going to be people who have good intentions, and they do fuck with you, but that doesn't mean that they have the same intentions and the same outlook that you do, to the point where they're actually going to help you succeed, and you have to be able to recognize that.
See, I this is gonna sound really harsh, but like the truth of the matter is, I don't really like to think of fans as part of the success process so much as they are just witnesses to it. Like, yes, having good word of mouth advertising helps. Having great fans helps. I will never diss the fandom. Like, fans are everything, but at the same time, they're really nothing when the decision making process is concerned. Like, your fans like you, they like your work. You should be making some kind of income off of your fans, and you reinvest that income so that you can find other fans. Like, you're the driving force here, not them. If you rely on them, like you said, like especially in your early days, everyone's gonna want to keep their secret awesome artist to themselves that they can occasionally whip out as a party trick for friends. But that's gonna be it. Like, you
Right.
need to be the driving force behind your own your own word of mouth, if you will, because they're not going to keep the wave going for you. Shit, look at people's attention spans these days, man. Even if they're your biggest fucking fan, what are the chances they're talking about you amongst hundreds of other things at any given point in the day?
Right.
You need to be doing that.
Right. And I think that goes back to what I said earlier about you have to come into it with your own understanding and your own talent, in regards to whether it's marketing or producing or being a rapper or writer. You have to know your sound, or at least know where you're going, and have a sense of intuition that is your own. Or you kind of just um, end up doing the thing that's most popular, and when that stops being most popular, if it's not easy to go with the times, then you're going to get
Mm-hmm.
left behind. And that happens a lot. That happens a lot more than people think it does. um, yeah, it comes down to like being wise about it. I think that people, it's like the reason that you're doing it for, especially people end up doing it for the wrong reasons. And so they do something that's popular because they want to make money, but they don't realize that in the industry it's still the artists who are deciding what's popular, because to some extent it's always going to be what's most socially relevant. And I feel like on a fundamental level, it's always going to have some connection to what's going on with the people, and that takes talent to communicate. And so
Mm-hmm.
talent is always going to be a factor.
I think
Yeah.
it also takes like a fair amount of social skill, which is why a lot of people who tend to be very into like the discipline of learning and art also tend to be decently introverted a lot of the time, and so they won't network as much as they should. Like, yeah, the artist decides what the wave is, more or less. They have to base it on something in the real world, but also like being grounded in the real world helps. Being around other humans helps, because even if you're the driving force of whatever, like, you might not be able to do everything yourself. You might just be the guy with the vision. It might take more people to execute. Look at a Drake album, for example. Have you
Mm.
ever seen how many fucking writers are on a Drake album?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. But as far as the world is concerned, Drake sets the tone. Drake is
Right.
the artist making this wave, right? That is a team of like 90 something people right there. So, like, don't be afraid to exercise, whatever amount of control you have in your network towards your own ends. Like, you can still be the idea man without necessarily having to take it all on again.
And I also want to emphasize the other side of that, which is sort of what you do and what I focus on a lot, which is having a broad range of skills and then constantly applying them. Because for one, this increases your value in the
Mm-hmm.
industry. And especially if you can focus on versatility with all of your skills and really fill your plate, but also be there to do it all, no matter how much time it takes you. Um, on the other side of it, you find that you have more longevity than almost anybody you know, because you know that no matter what happens, you're always going to have options of what kind of value you could bring to the table, no matter what room you're in.
Yeah, definitely. I do think it's important though to try to restrain yourself on that and don't spread yourself too thin. Like
Right.
remember in the beginning, I basically broke it down to 3 points because that's how I consider it. Like, okay, say somebody has like a regular ass 9 to 5 job, right? You couldn't expect a normal like hyper productive person to work more than 3 jobs and be good at all of them, you know? And so that's how I thought about it. And so I kind of narrowed it down because I used to shoot music videos. I dabbled in graphic design with Photoshop. I wrote plenty of my cover designs, but I did like and pretty much everything you can think to do that you could, need to bring an artist to market. I've done at one point just for myself and for my friends. And at some point, I had to narrow the list of skills towards 3 things I could at least focus on enough to consider them jobs, and that's how I narrowed it down to the recording, production, and maintaining my own artist persona because they were really closely related, but they were also 3 separate disciplines that I could break off if I needed to.
Right. Right. And that's something to keep in mind, is that you have to, everything that you focus on has to bleed in to the other things you have going on, so that they all kind of influence each other in a positive way. So like
Yeah,
your producing influences affect your rapping influences, and your recording techniques also bleeds into your engineering understanding, and your engineering goes into your production, and kind of like
yeah,
going
it all
around
kind
and
of
around.
just feeds into each other. Like, you ever see Hunter x Hunter?
Mm-mm.
Okay, swear to God, there's this anime called Hunter x Hunter, and they basically said the same thing. There's like a wheel in the show that determines what a person's superpowers are or whatever, and you have 2 of them, and depending where they're placed in said wheel, that tells you like how compatible your powers are with each other, like if they help each other, if they work against each other, etc. And that's like a huge part of the show, and like that's literally how anything creative works. It's like you either practice complementary disciplines or you practice completely separate disciplines that might pull time from one another or even work against each other if they're like, say you have a audio and a visual skill, because those are completely different disciplines.
Yeah, I think having, like you said, complementary disciplines is probably the best word for it. And when you do that, you set yourself up for success. There's something about an investment tactic that was it Warren Buffett? No, Ray Dalio talked about, and he put it like you have to place a certain amount of investments in the most risk-free uh, sort of situations that you possibly can for yourself, and
Mm-hmm.
try them over time to make sure that you get constant returns, so that they can feed into each other, and kind of feed in to your how you say it, it's the way that you get the highest gains. So there's a process for artists where you find out what you're kind of meant for, that you really connect with most, and you work with that constantly. And over time, you get you get a lot better at it, rather than, like, if you hate engineering, if you hate mixing, and you just dread it, and all you want to do is something else when you do it, but you force yourself to do it anyway, you're not going to get nearly as good at it, because you're going to be focused on something else. Whereas
Yeah,
if,
like everyone has an affinity for something.
right, right, so
And
that's,
weirdly enough, that's always like the first thing that comes out when somebody is trying to find themselves artistically. Like, it's really rough and unpolished, but if you look back to the first version of pretty much any creative person, you can find some semblance of what they ended up doing. Like when I started, I couldn't rap worth a damn. I decided that all I wanted to make was like upbeat, trappy music, and that was just it. That was the wave for me. And like you fast forward, I've been through a few iterations now, but like the defining thing, all my beats are fucking trunk shakers. Like every last one of them in every style. It's just like that's the thing. Like you could
right,
play it at a party, even if it's some of my sad shit. It's weird.
right. So in the spirit of like time is money, I look at it as all the skills that you develop, that's you spending your time on yourself. And to get the highest gain out of it, you have to sort of go through the trial and error process of finding out what you have the highest affinity for, and then
Mm-hmm.
really finding out how you can um, keep the drive going to continue to get better at it and apply it in different places. and then over time it becomes something that you can actually make money off of, or you can travel with, or you can do in places that you haven't done it before, or you can do it in ways that you haven't done it before, and things like that.
Yeah, and like keeping with the whole time is money thing, I think you also have to remember there is a minimum time investment to reach any level of skill. It doesn't matter how good you are naturally at something until you've done that thing enough times in enough different settings that you've learned the mechanics of why it works and not just what buttons to push or what, where to land your punchline, rules like that. Until you understand why the rules exist, it's really hard to adapt. So like, you ever heard the old like minimum time investment to become an expert at anything is 10,000 hours of practice? You ever heard
Right.
that one?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know how true it is, but the idea that like a threshold exists where you actually know what you're doing, I think that's a thing. I don't care how talented you are. Like even the Doms and Hads of the world made other music long before they turned into what they are today.
Yeah, I
I
agree.
remember when Dom was experimenting with mixing in his car stereo actually, and a lot of like his current vocal sound came from some of those car stereo experiments that he was doing.
Yeah, I agree. It's funny because I've been publishing music probably for as long as I've been making it, but I was writing before that. But then there was a point where I had a microphone and I just started making it, and it all happened at once. But I've taken down probably 85% of the stuff that I've put up, and I've
Oh god.
been yeah, so and I've been called out for it, dozens of times by people who are like, "Oh, I like that song," and I'm like, "No, but you don't understand." Like now it's 2 weeks later, and I'm looking back, and it really just doesn't sit right with me. I just don't want this song as part of my discography, and that kind of happens a lot because you're experimenting, and that hindsight shows you like these are the things that I want to take for my experimentation and bring them forward with me, and then these are the things that I don't feel like are working that I want to find alternatives for that work better.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And I think the other thing is too, like even when you're really trying to find your niche with everything, um, I always like to say everything can always sound better. Um, and that doesn't necessarily mean like give yourself OCD and sit there working on a song for 3 years. But like once you've made a song, I always say don't settle for your first version of that song. Like even songs like I said by bigger artists that you listen to, you'll hear multiple versions of those songs. Some artists will include the demo version on their project, and it'll be a completely different instrumentation behind the top line of vocals. Sometimes you'll hear things like the reference tracks Quentin Miller did, things like that. Like there's always more than one version before the version you show people. And I think one thing I've learned is help me stop going back and wanting to take my own music down is do the same song a few times until I feel like I've nailed it, and then I'll put it up. Because I feel like a lot of my old shit too, I was just uploading the first thing I got close enough where I was like, yes, this sounds like it could be done. And then 2 weeks later, I'd have listened to it a few times and I'd be like, what was I thinking? That wasn't done. So, like, just finish it. That helps too.
Right. Well, yeah, that definitely comes into it. I think for me personally, what I find is that there will be a part of the song that I really don't like, and another part of the song that I really do like, and it'll also be unfinished. And it kind of just goes into the back because I want to drive forward and keep seeing what else I find. But then there's also always the possibility of taking what you have done and turning it into something in the future. And I think a lot of times I find that I'll just have a feeling when I hear a beat
Mm-hmm.
or I make something like, oh, this old thing that I have might go really well over this. And if I hadn't just waited, it's like it's always available and there for me if I really want to take something that I made beforehand and turn it into something new.
Yeah, I just say like if like honestly, sit on things a little bit before you just throw them out into the world for people to hear. I mean, it takes at least a month for most distributors to get things up if you're dropping music the right way anyway. So at least take a month to think about it. And then the other thing is like you said, like reach back into your bag sometimes. Don't be afraid to lay an idea down so it exists, it's tangible, and then just
Mm.
leave the idea there. You have ammunition now.
Yeah.
Congratulations, you're still a creative.
Yeah.
Um, my thing is just like I always love going back and like I've still got like folders and folders of unfinished songs, but I love going back and grabbing the gems out of those folders sometimes and actually polishing them up and like making them something presentable because an idea that you never complete never really goes anywhere and it kind of defeats the purpose. But like you also don't want to rush, so it's a
Right.
tightrope walk, really.
Right.
Like release it when it's done, but like try to get it out there because that's the point of music. You're trying to make people feel something, so like let them hear it. But like let them
Exactly.
hear it when you're ready. Look at what's the girl signed to TDE? SZA. Look at SZA. Great example. Top almost pimp slapped that bitch for not dropping an album, but she wasn't moving. And then she did drop the album, and what happened? That motherfucker took over the world.
Yeah. Yeah. I've heard a little bit about that. And I think it's a good example that it doesn't matter how long you have to trust your intuition, and it doesn't matter how long that takes. You'll know when you're on, and you'll know when you're not. And you just
Mm-hmm.
have to kind of accept that if you're really a serious artist and you have a vision, then you have to be willing to kind of put all the bets on yourself. And then another aspect to that is also not having it all in one basket, but having multiple skills and kind of having multiple visions and multiple things that feed into each other again, like we said before.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And back to your point earlier about like being kind of a curator of your own circle and everything. Try to have people around you who, like I said, meet that honesty quota and they're not afraid to give you their straight opinion. Like one thing I've gotten into the habit of doing is I involve the people close to me in my release process. We actually do occasionally what I call a keeper sweep party. I'll get a couple of bottles, roll up a little bit, and I've got good speakers in my living room, and I'll play a project from start to finish the way I would have released that project, right? And then I'll open the room up and I'll ask them which songs they think I should delete from the project. Just straight up. I don't always do what they say, but I want to hear that feedback. I want somebody to say, dude, you sound stupid as hell on this. Delete that shit. I want somebody to point at a lyric and be like, that's gay as fuck. They're gonna do you like they did 42 Dougs. Don't say that. I want people to like. I want to get the internal roast test before I put out work. And if you don't have a circle that you can do that with, maybe align yourself with more honest, more real, more creative individuals, like you were saying earlier. Like maybe curate that circle a little better because that helps too. Like when you
Right.
know how humans react to your work before you let the rest of the humans hear your work.
Right.
Like you don't think they don't do that for all your favorite rappers? They do.
And I really
Back in the '90s, they used to say you got jousted if you fucked up on a record, and they would tell you in the studio.
And I feel that parallels the thing that I brought up in the beginning, which is choosing your influences wisely. When you kind of curate your taste wisely, and you listen to things that are like for your interest, the absolute best that you can find. You
Mm-hmm.
have to know what you love, but then you also have to know the entire genre and really experiment to find out like, oh, these people are able to kind of represent this emotion in a much more detailed and fun way than anybody else I've seen before. And if you don't continue experimenting, you don't find that. And then that kind of
Yeah,
raises the bar for you when you go back and you listen to your music and you're honest with yourself. You're going to hear it in a different way because your interests kind of influence your bar so heavily that you're going to say whether or not it's good based on who you listen to.
definitely. And I think another thing is like understanding genre is excellent, but also genre is kind of like the Matrix. You kind of have to understand that it exists and that it doesn't at the same time to
Mm,
really play with it. Like genre in real life works the way gender works on Tumblr, if you feel me. Like Billie Eilish and Lil Nas X taught me that you can basically identify as whatever genre you want if you understand the core things that make those genres function. And that's where we're getting all this really interesting like fusion music lately. Is
right.
just from people understanding like the shared components of different styles of music that are worlds apart.
Yeah.
It's kind of like when you learn English and then you learn Spanish. Learning French is a piece of cake after that. At least that's what I've been told by my friends who speak multiple languages. I speak broken English fluently. I don't know any of that.
Right. And we've talked about this a few times on the podcast, which is music as a language and how that's a literal thing. Um, and that the same process of you learning other languages, whether it's English or Spanish or French, is the same process in music of skill building and being able to evoke emotions, because language is all about how you use after the fact of like knowing words and being able to read, write, and speak it, which is one layer. There's then another layer which is evoking emotions. Like if you go to France, that's always I brought this up with Echo that it's a meme in France that you go there and they talk so smooth that your woman ends up sleeping with a Frenchman. So it's the same kind of pattern of like you have to speak in a certain way to evoke that emotion. Like Frenchmen speak slow with that kind of romantic tone, which is different from other languages, and it stands out. Um, and in music, you do the same kind of thing where you have to put certain inflections and certain tones into everything, and you have to understand them and use them enough. And you also need real world experience. But it's kind of, I digress. It's a deep rabbit hole. Um, so for you, what got you into making music in the first place as a kid? Like, what really inspired you?
All right, so I don't know if I've ever told this story on Rappad before, but I'm going to embarrass myself real quick. Set the stage. I was 14 years old, right? At a fucking anime convention of all things. And they had a rave there, okay? And first thing that happened was I go into this rave, which for whatever reason is operating at 6 p.m. I don't understand anime rules, but like that's how it worked. And I fell over because I couldn't see shit. I was blind. There were flashing lights. Great. Almost went into the DJ's booth. It was excellent. Security guy picked me up, and I actually looked out over the crowd now because the DJ's booth was like a couple feet up off the ground from where like the rest of the crowd was. Right. I looked out over the crowd. And I looked at how they were moving. And I'm like, that is what I want to do. And then like 30 minutes later, I was talking to some cute chick in line, and I did what all 14-year-old boys have done at some point in their life. I lied and said I did the coolest thing I could possibly think of, which in that moment was make dubstep. I shit you not. The night that followed was 8 hours of YouTube tutorials on how to use FL Studio. The girl never called me back, obviously. I was a dweeb back then. Like, what did I expect? But the music stayed. And then I went through a lot of bullshit in my life, and I transitioned out of like that dubby, like dub trap, like EDM zone into hip hop because I knew I couldn't sing worth a damn, and I'd had to put my pain somewhere, honestly. And I'm like, well, I make music now, so like let's explore this a little more deeply. And I just never stopped. But like, no, it all started because I tripped over a DJ at a rave and then tried to hit on a girl poorly. Swear to God.
Okay, it's a pretty cool story. Yeah.
Yeah. I think the important thing was just like in that moment, I did not expect to find my life calling there at all. I just happened to accidentally pick up a cool skill and it piqued my interest. So I ran with it. I did the opposite of what the world tells you to do, and I decided I was going to read and I was going to research and I was going to learn something new that day. I was going to put in effort. I was going to try instead of just coasting by, and one of the handfuls of times I've ever done that in my entire existence has paid off. Like I we're on audio right now. I don't even need to turn the camera, but like I'm sitting in my studio right now. This thing is like you can see this. Like, dude, I have this in my house. If 14-year-old me could see this shit, he would have lied a lot more.
It's pretty cool. Yeah, it's pretty cool.
So I don't know. Just like go with your gut. Like if you get into something and you're just like, yeah, that has my attention. Like try it out. What's the worst thing that happens? You waste a little time. You're doing that right now, listening to my voice.
Hmm. So where do you see yourself in 10 years now that you've come this far?
Well, I've been thinking a lot about longevity lately because I am 23 now. Like this is a journey that started when I was a teenager. I'm 23. I'm a year deep into it actually being a primary income, and I want to retire one day, man. So what I've been looking into a lot is music licensing and the industry behind the back end on music. Because take like Mariah Carey around Christmas time, for example. You know, every time Christmas rolls around, Mariah Carey is getting the check because they're playing that song in every supermarket known to man. You know, like that is a lifespan right there. Even off of just that check every year, I'm sure if she wanted to live a comfortable life, she could. It wouldn't be Mariah Carey's life, but yeah, she's not going to go broke anytime soon. And that's really what I'm aiming at right now. I want to find pockets where my music can live on beyond my artistic career as an actual like front man.
Hmm.
You know,
Yeah.
like look at how many rappers have reinvested their rap money into other industries now. Look at Ice Cube. The guy's got a movie studio. Ice Cube barely raps anymore, but he managed to turn his rap money into other money, and now the guy can, be old comfortably. Look at Dr. Dre. Dr. Dre made beats. He was a producer, and then he said, "Okay, what could I get into where people would trust my opinion? I got it. Headphones, music." So he closed the biggest deal since the speaker was invented in the history of audio. Like, that was a rapper and a producer there. So like I'm looking at what's next at this point. I'm still going as hard in my music as I can until there's no more music left in me. But like when I reach that point, I I need to shift into some kind of a managerial position where I'm either teaching somebody music or I'm licensing my music to somebody or I'm, making something for music lovers, like something that like that a musician can graduate out of is what I'm looking at for my future, honestly. Like
Hmm.
within the next 10 years, I want to know what that is for me.
Got you.
Because honestly, I'm 23 right now, so I feel like 10 years, that's about the lifespan that this run I'm on is going to have. Like, by the time I'm about 35, I no longer want to be treating myself as the front man for any kind of recording act.
Heard. Okay. Um, and so far, what are some of the most exciting moments for you as a producer, or as a producer and as an engineer?
The most exciting moments for me have actually been when I've been able to meet bigger independent artists from my area. Because one of the first things I did when I got serious about this was I started going all over the city to just different shows and trying to meet as many local artists as I could and get acquainted with my scene around me. Like the internet's a great place, don't get me wrong, but like there's something about music you can see face to face. It's like you said
Mm,
before, like you can play live instruments. It just got a different feel to it.
right.
So at first I was meeting a lot of artists in my city from a fan perspective, like, hey, you're doing what I want to do, this is my goal in life. And then like, you know this year I've been able to meet a lot of those same artists in studio settings. Like one of the most streamed artists from my city, don't laugh at the name, it goes by Lil Chicken, but he's basically the closest thing we have to a Drake. He's the only guy here with like multiple songs with millions of streams on them other than this singer dude Ishdar, right? I've recorded him in my home. He's just like randomly came in and passed me a blunt before because his producer was my business partner for a while. And like moments like those were cool to me because I started as a fan of the culture and I embedded myself in the culture that was around me. Or like one of my regular clients now, the first time I met him, I almost like had a fucking fangirl heart attack. His name is Big Juan. He's actually younger than me, but like this dude is changing the scene around here in a lot of ways, especially on the east side. Dude, I walk into the studio, the guy passes me like a fucking pillow of weed, like a body pillow sized bag of weed, and just goes, "Hey," he didn't even know me. So I'm just looking
Pretty
at these
fun.
guys, and like a lot of them live how they talk about in their songs too. So it's fun for me because I'm just like, wow, like it's alive. It's not just some shit people are talking about on mics. Like a lot of this shit, it's alive, it's breathing, it's walking down the street, and I haven't been paying attention. And when I started paying attention, and it paid attention back, that was fun.
Yeah. Yeah, it
And I
sounds
feel
pretty
like
fun.
any city you're in, by the way, you can do that. Like a lot of people like to say, "Oh, my city doesn't have a scene. My city doesn't have this. My city doesn't have that." Dude, I've got like producers and cameramen from cities I've never been to, like places in Ohio that I would think they only have like cowboys in, and these people are shooting rap videos nonstop. Like I know their scene, and they have like 8 to 10 front running artists with like constant releases. Like, dude, get to know those guys. Like, find your hometown heroes because like it's great if you can become the next big thing in Hollywood. Like, don't get me wrong, I will take my hat off to you. But like, you know what else is great? Making a living off of your music and hanging out with people you look up to. That's fun. And then you can just expand your pool as you grow. Like,
Gotcha.
I want to go to Cali now. I want to meet Mike Sherm. That's my next one.
Heard. Yeah, I agree. I agree. And there is a dynamic of people who live in places that aren't. It's not as easy. Uh, and there are definitely levels to that. Like there's the difference between like I'm in Hartford, and probably the biggest artist we have goes into like tens of thousands. Nothing like hundreds of thousands or millions of hits or anything like that, as far as I'm aware. I'm sure there are independent artists that are all over Connecticut in the corners and stuff that I don't know of, but um, that's an element of the internet, is that uh, there are all kinds of things that can slip by because there's so many people on the internet. Uh,
Hmm. But I think the other thing is, like, you look at that guy who's got tens of thousands, and say you have one of those in your locale, right? And you might have like regular thousands. How much stronger would you be if you could align with that person? What if you have something to teach each other? Like,
right.
that's what I mean when I say like my city has a DIY culture that sprung out of like our hip hop scene. Like, great example. I have a friend named Brema, actually. True story. You can look it up in the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel if you think I'm capping. But like, his name is Brema. He has this company called Unfinished Legacy, and Unfinished Legacy was born out of a local hip hop collective, actually. And they used to practice in this warehouse like art space downtown. And these guys now have a contract with Levi's. And it was literally just grassroots shit. It was a bunch of kids with like mics, more or less, at some point, and they met at open mics, and then they just decided, you know what, we really love this art shit. We're all together. We're united. We're gonna pool our money. We're gonna get this studio space, and it became this weird little like hippie artsy thing downtown. Like, there's just this studio space out south side downtown, and fucking Levi's took note because they were making merch for their band and people started buying it. And
Mm-hmm.
now they have a collabo with Levi's.
Right.
Like, it doesn't have to be, oh, we've got this dude who did millions. I want to link in with that guy. It could be, we've got this dude who's really interesting and he's got like an audience of 10,000 people. But like, imagine what kind of splash you can make with 10,000 people behind.
Right. Well,
Not
there's an
everyone starts at the top. Like, I sure as fuck didn't. I'm not even there yet.
Well, I think what I'm more emphasizing is there's an element of using your resources wisely when you're networking, uh, like the internet, so
Yeah,
that
definitely.
if you don't have a whole lot of, like a high chance of kind of getting more than a few thousand people in your area, it might be wiser to just sort of network and market yourself to people who like a certain genre or a certain niche and go global. And that can really help you kind of manifest a cult fan base. Because if you look at a group like Odd Future when they were starting out, their fan base was spread all over the world, and they could go to Europe.
Yeah, definitely. One thing I've realized about the internet though is I think growing up, at least I did. I don't know if anyone else had this perception, but I got the internet wrong. I always thought you put things on the internet and people found the things you put there. What I've come to realize is you put yourself on the internet and people find you, and it leads to direct conversations that make things happen. Take another user from the site, actually. You remember Jack
Mm,
Project?
yeah. Oh, yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah. Say what you want about that cocky bastard. I still respect him because I saw exactly what he did when we were in that little collective on the forum, the gods thing. He just would like randomly pop up in the group chat every day, and he'd have met some other new person on Instagram, and like 9 times out of 10, that person was a complete and total scam. But he would ask them about their business proposition, whatever, 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 and he would figure out what their game was, and he would learn to play it. And like, that's how he was using the internet. And look at that guy now. Like, he has been interviewed in Elevator and has had music on Vice, I think it is. And like, you can type in his name, type beat, and get pages and pages of results. Like, he's entrenched himself in the web that much. But it's because he reached out every day to influencers on all levels and said, "Hey, this is me. What's good?" Like,
Mm.
that was how he used the internet, and it was really interesting to see. Like, it's something I've done myself a lot more lately. Definitely on a smaller scale. I haven't found a niche like that guy, but like, it's that's how I use my social media. Actually, is like, I try to start conversations with people, like actual conversations that don't have like buttons on them, and that tends to go really well for me.
Word. It makes sense. And before wrapping up, I think I have one more question. What do you think about how your upbringing plays into how you approach music and how you learn and how you get good at things and how you have to kind of be mindful of yourself and meet yourself where you're at.
I think your upbringing plays a huge part, and it's either going to do one of two things to you, right? If you are the way you were raised, if you actually are that way, I think that looking on your upbringing for inspiration and as a kind of compass to stay true to yourself can be a good practice. Because, like, say for example, like me, I was raised in the church, right? Say you're heavily spiritual and you were raised in the church. I think looking back on that, that formative experience can help you stay true to your identity. But then I think of the other edge of that sword is if you're somebody like me, well, like I said, I was raised in the church, but I'm pretty lacking in belief in just about anything. I'm like, if I don't give a fuck as a person. So, like, for me, it's always been kind of a dissonant thing where the more I explored my art, the more I felt myself breaking away from my upbringing, actually. And I think for a lot of people, especially in hip hop, breaking away from where you came from can be just as important as trying to stay true to where you came from, especially for like artists in the hood, Like, you always want to sound like you understand, but at the same time, you're doing this because you want to get to a place in life where you don't have to think about it anymore, too. Or like if you're from a small town and you dream of big city life, like it might be hard to retain that small town edge if that's not what you want. Maybe you're aspiring to something more. Maybe you're pulling away from your influence, your upbringing too. Well, that's what I did. But
Yeah,
yeah,
like
I feel like it can work both ways.
there's I think there's an element of, first of all, being able to observe things as they are and see what's valuable and what's kind of like pointless, and then look at yourself honestly and be able to admit there are these things that I really don't need, and I have to kind of go against the grain and relearn how, like, maybe it's your social skills, like maybe you're a jealous person and you're realizing that, like, in order to succeed, it's very wise to be humble, so now you have to turn around and relearn your kind of social skills, which there's something to be said about just knowing the difference between, like, sometimes you have things that you want to capitalize on every level that are already present, and then there are other things that you have to be able to notice and be like, I have to sort of replace this aspect of my conduct, whether it's as a creative or as like a logical person, like as a business person or an engineer.
Yeah, definitely. And I think the other thing about your upbringing that's always going to affect your creativity is if you're, among those of us in the majority who are lucky enough to know our parents, what your parents think. Because whether you care or you don't care, it's always going to have some bearing on what you make. Take Lil Wayne, for example, the guy who dropped an entire album with no profanity because he wanted to make something his mom could listen to. Like,
Mm.
that's a thing. That happened. Like,
Wow.
and I feel like whether you're a total punk about it and you're just like, yeah, fuck authority, or whether you have respect for certain people, like, I think that kind of helps you decide where your hard limits are too, because some of those limits might not even be yours. They might be limits that were raised into you.
Right. Right. And yeah, you just have to be able to kind of see that and then focus on that part of yourself and realize it's a weak spot, and then make it strong. Do whatever you can to sort of fill in those gaps for yourself so that you're most likely to succeed.
Facts.
So with that being said, I think I'm gonna cut it off here. If you want to let the people know what you got going on, if you got albums coming or a project that you've worked on that's you're really excited about that's coming or anything like that.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. Feel free to follow me on social media. I'm at 414 Grace on everything except Snapchat because Snapchat hates me.
It's okay.
I'm like constantly working on new stuff, dropping things like clips with me working with artists, things of that sort. And then I do have a couple of releases actually on the way, hopefully before the year is out. One of them is just a two-track little EP. Doesn't even work for this. They call it a single, but it's a little two-track experiment I'm dropping called "Keep Your Distance."
Hmm.
That comes out on December 12th.
Okay.
And hopefully, sometime around the 25th to the 30th, I'm going to be dropping a follow up to my Totally Sober EP titled Still Totally Sober. Those will
Heard.
be available on all platforms. Also, if you're into Instagram or Facebook Live, catch me on there sometimes. I'm like constantly making beats on my live streams and taking random requests and questions from people. If you ever want to get in touch with me, face to face ish. Um, Besides that, thanks for having me. I've been Nick Grace. Appreciate you.
Thank you for coming on. Really appreciate it. And yep, see everybody on the next podcast.